before we continue with the Midrash Sefer Ha-Aggadah, since today is Hanukkah, it's a good question that Sammy raised, and this is what do we find in the Midrash about Hanukkah? And the truth is that not only in the Midrash, also when you look at the Mishnah mentions nothing about Hanukkah. There's no tractate in the Mishnah dedicated to Hanukkah. You have a whole Masechet, a tractate dedicated to Purim. When you speak about Shabbat, you have two Masechtot, Shabbat and Eruvin, 34 chapters altogether. But when you look at the Mishnah, there's nothing, and except for bypassing Hanukkah Shekofta, Hed Zakukla, and also in the Gemara. In the Gemara, the whole discussion about Hanukkah is a couple of pages that come in Masechet Shabbat, in the second chapter, Bameh Madlikin, and they speak about what the priority between Ner Hanukkah and Ner Shabbat. On the other hand, from outside sources, we have enough material. We have Yosef ben Matityahu, who wrote the history. We have the book of Maccabee, Sefer HaMaccabim, the book of Maccabees. We have outside sources that did not make it into the Tanakh. And it's a good question when you say, why didn't we have more discussion about Hanukkah in the in Midrashic sources? So another question which could be similar to that, and that is where is Masada? The story of Masada. Where is it in the Midrash? We don't have anything about Masada in the Midrash, and it's interesting because in the modern history of the state of Israel, both Masada and Hanukkah play a central role. But when you look at our so both Masada and Hanukkah are sort of like central ideas in the new narrative of Zionism in the state of Israel, right? Shenit Masada lo tipol, Masada will not fall again. And then they even took the idea of Hanukkah and twisted it to say that the establishment of the state of Israel was not due to a divine miracle. There's a famous poem called Anu Nosim Lapidim. I'm sure you know it, right? Exactly. Belelot Afelim, right? And then they say, Nes lo karal, Anu Nosim Lapidim Belelot Afelim. We carry torches in dark nights. And the refrain is Nes lo karalanu, Pach Shemen lo matzanu. The Basela Akinu Vayi Or. We did not have a miracle. We did not find a jar of oil. We hit the rock, and there was light. Meaning that we are recreating now here the state of Israel, and we perform the miracles. And that probably is the reason why the rabbis avoided discussing Hanukkah altogether. Or really limited the discussion to as little as possible, because they did not want to encourage people to be on the militant side, and they did not want to glorify the idea of waging war against other nations. It was just a realistic analysis of what was going around them. They realized, like we mentioned the other day, that you cannot defeat the Roman Empire. You cannot repeat the success of the war against the Greeks, and if you continue in that manner, the nation will be annihilated. And they were right, because if you look at the date, about in 160 before the Common Era, the war started. 156, around that time, the kingdom of the Hashmonaim was established. In about 60 years, they became so corrupt, and they were like the Roman rulers. And then that's where you find actually one midrash that refers to it, and it's in Masechet Bava Batra. The Gemara speaks about Herod. Herod was the architect of the temple. He built the second temple, like we mentioned the other day. That the temple that we have today is mostly from the time of Herod, and Herod demolished parts of the Bet HaMikdash, parts of the temple that was built by the people who came back from Bavel, and rebuilt in segments the whole temple. And the Midrash says that, and it's brought in Masechet Bava Batra, that Herod was Avda de Bet Hashmonai. He was a servant, a slave of the house of Hashmonai. And one day he heard a divine voice, so like a mini prophecy that said, "Kol Avda de Marid Hashta Matzlah." Any slave who rebels now against his servant, against his masters, will succeed. So, Katal lekule Rabvata, he got up and he killed all of his masters, and only left one young girl that he wanted to marry, but that girl did not want to marry him. So she went up the roof, and she raised her voice, and she said, "Kol man de'amar mi bet Hashmonai ka'atina avdahu dela ishtayra minnehu elai olmeta." She says, anyone who comes and says that I am a descendant, a scion of the house of Hashmonai, is a liar, is a slave, because I'm the only one that remained alive, and I'm now throwing myself from the roof. And she did that, and she committed suicide. So this is how the Midrash tells the story, which is not what happened in reality. In reality, Herod was not a slave. Herod was the sons of Antipatros, where next to Lod, not far, there's like Antipater next to Rosh Hashanah in Israel. So Antipatros was his father. He was the governor of Edom, converted by the Hashmonai kings. Herod was his son. He had a high status. He was not a slave. He was a governor and also a protege of the Romans. And he traveled back and forth between Rome and Israel. He was a ruthless ruler. He crushed the rebellion. There was a rebellion of the pious people in the Galilee, and he killed all the rebels. Thousands of people he massacred. But he did marry Miriam, who was from the family of Hashmonaim, and he did have children from her. So what the Midrash does, this is a rewriting history. The Midrash is written a couple of 100 years after Herod, and they look back and say, for us, Herod is a slave. He came from Idumea. He never got free of that heritage. He destroyed the house of Hashmonai, meaning they look at it as the fact that he married the daughter of Hashmonaim but converted the whole house into a corrupt dynasty. He killed the house of Hashmonaim. They also say that it was sort of a divine providence that helped him embark on that path, because there was a divine voice that came out and said, anyone who rebels against his masters will succeed. But they say no one remained of the original house of Hashmonaim. So this is the history of, sort of like in a nutshell, of what happened and how the Midrash tells it. But the Midrash comes from a negative point of view, saying that the end of the house of Hashmonai was not good. And there's another statement which is also quoted by Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman in his commentary to the Torah on the pasuk Le'asur shevet miYehuda u'mchokek ben raglav, that the staff of the ruler will always belong to the tribe of Yehuda, and he says this is where the Hashmonaim transgressed the prophecy, because they were supposed to be from the tribe of Levi. They were supposed to be the religious servants, the servants of the temple, and not the kings, not the political rulers. And we see it until today. This is a very clever distinction that's made by the Torah and later on repeated by the Midrash and the commentators, that you must have a separation of church and state. In the United States, there's allegedly a separation of church and state, and there still is influence, but we could say there's a certain balance. In Israel, there's no separation of church and state, and it's one of the roots of our problems. When the rabbinate tries to control how people get married, we know what is kosher, what is not, and limit people's activities on Shabbat. They had to be, if they were of the mentality of live and not live, there would be mutual respect. People would respect more the Shabbat if you would not come and impose the Shabbat on them. But that's a different story. But already we see the idea in the writing of the Ramban based on the Midrash. So that happens, like I said, 160, 150 before the Common Era, for 100 years up at the time of Herod. In the year 67, the war, the Great Revolt that led to the destruction of the temple, 67 to 69. So which year was the final destruction? And then after that, for 3 years, the Romans besieged Masada. And after that, after the Great Revolt was under control, the Romans destroyed any opposition, and they even went after this last fortress of Masada with a couple of hundred people, because they had to show the world that you do not oppose the Roman Empire. Anyone who does that will be destroyed. So how long did it take the Jews to get up again and fight the Romans? After the year 70, 73, before Bar Kokhba, there was another small rebellion that was also very problematic, 112 to 115. It's called the Mered HaTfutzot, the rebellion of the diaspora. It started in Kireni, in the Mediterranean, in the islands, and spread, but again, was crushed. And another, Vatishkot Haaretz, in total you can say Vatishkot Haaretz Shishim Shana. There was relative calm for about 60 years up until 132.
Who was after Bar Kokhba?
No, after Bar Kokhba there's nothing, that's it. At the end. 132 to 135 is the famous revolt, the Bar Kokhba revolt.
Is Kireni from North Africa?
Yes, yeah.
That's from the province of Libya.
Yeah.
Cyrenaica.
Kireni, yeah, Cyrenaica. So, and by the way, Rabbi Akiva, when he campaigned for the Bar Kokhba revolt, visited Kireni as well. He visited North Africa, Rome, France, all the Roman territories, raising money, recruiting people to go fight against the Romans. In those 60 years, the Jewish community in Israel, more or less, was able to recover and rebuild itself and live under Roman control, and they could have survived. They could have not maybe thrived, but they could have had a continuous existence in the land of Israel. But with the Bar Kokhba revolt, 132 to 135, that was the end. After that, there was no way for the Jewish community to recover. When we know later on in the Roman Empire started adopting Christianity. Then they had Julian the Apostate reversed it, but Constantine brought it back. And once the Christian religion became the religion of the Roman Empire, there was no way back. And the Yishuv in Eretz Israel, the community kept dwindling. They called off the Romans. Banished the idea of what is called the Nesiut, the presidency, and the Bedin, all that. And the rabbis saw all that. I mean, in retrospect, they look back and they say, look what we did to ourselves. With the Greeks, we succeeded somewhat, but then we kept repeating the same pattern of fighting a force that is so much more powerful than us. This is not good. We cannot encourage people to do that. So they rewrote parts of history, and they did not write about certain things. So the rabbis do not promote the idea of Hanukkah. And if you look at Al Nisim is all about, it's not about the war. It's not, the way the war is described Al Nisim, Venatata, right? Rabim be'ad me'atim, Giborim be'ad halashim, like the Greek they were mighty, they were a multitude, and there was no way that this military victory could have been carried out without a miracle. So it's like there was a one-time miracle. Don't try to repeat it. You can't order miracles. They come when Hashem wants them to come. So they played down the role of the battle and the military campaign on Hanukkah. Nobody knows about that. If you go to any Talmud Torah or Yeshiva, what do they learn about? The kids are playing the dreidels while studying Torah, right? So the whole strength of the war was about studying Torah. Today it's the opposite. The kids pretend to study Torah and they play under the table with the iPad. So it's the reversal of faith. But the rabbis did not include the whole idea of the military victory on Hanukkah, and for the same reason they played down Masada. Not just because people committed suicide in Masada, because that is not.
One person committed suicide.
No, he killed all the rest. Yeah, but they were willing to. So it's a all the warriors in Masada were willing to die. So even if one person like Eliezer ben Azar ben Yair killed all the rest, but they were willing. So it's a kind of mass suicide. But it was not because of that, because the rabbis do glorify other acts of suicide, like this Miriam that I just told you about, or the case mentioned in the Talmud that 400 boys and girls were taken as slaves to Rome, and they knew that they're going to be used as sex slaves and be converted to idolatry, so they jumped into the ocean, and the rabbis do glorify that. So they say, if you want to sacrifice your life for Kiddush Hashem or to avoid transgressing a certain concept, it's okay. But Masada, they did not like the story of Masada. Why? Because that was an act of defiance against the Roman Empire that they felt was unnecessary. So we take it all back into context. The reality was that Jews tried to be more proactive and militant and fight against the Romans, and it failed. And the rabbis, as a result, retracted and tried to be as pacifist and neutral as possible. Unfortunately, in the future generations, people didn't understand that the midrash was, or you call it, time sensitive. That it applied only to the relationships between Jews and the Roman Empire. So we started incorporating this kind of a diaspora mentality that we always have to be under the heel of the oppressor, especially in Europe. And later, we read once that the Shuva of Rabbi Toledano, Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Toledano, who was the chief rabbi in Egypt in the 1920s and later on became the minister of religious affairs in the first government, wrote in the 1930s, early 1930s, he wrote that every yeshiva should have in its curriculum military training, self-defense, weapons, etc. And he said we should not have a repetition of the 1929 pogroms in Hebron, Meorot Tarpat. Very, very powerful words. He says, why do we think that we have to be trodden under the feet of our oppressors? We're not supposed to be slaves, but that was part of this mentality of eschewing any proactive measure to try to oppose our oppressors. So long history, it's of Hanukkah. When you ask me, like, Savi, why or what does the Midrash say about Hanukkah? It was the approach was, let's not speak about that. Let's not encourage people to wage a war against the nations because it's going to be dangerous. For the certain period that it was stated in, it was good, it was important. Unfortunately, when it was projected over millennia, and definitely in the 20th century, where and during the Holocaust, where there was a possibility to fight or to run away, and in the beginning people didn't do it because they thought this is what Hashem wants us to do, and this is how it has to happen. It was unfortunate. So always the bottom line, maybe the conclusion of what we said is that when we read the Midrashim and the interpretation of the rabbis, we have to always see them in the historical context, both what they said and what they didn't say.